Armed Forces Chief of Staff Carlito Galvez says martial rule was justified during the regime of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos.
Humingi ng tawad si Ilocos Norte Governor Amy Marcos sa lahat ng mga biktima ng martial law. Ginawa ito ng panganay na anak ng yumaong Pangulong Marcos kasunod ang pahayag ni dating Pangulong Fidel Ramos na dapat na humingi ng kapatawaran ang pamilya Marcos sa mga biktima ng batas militar.
No pandemic stopped people from remembering that one fateful day in 1972 when the Philippines was placed under martial rule.
My countrymen, I got the 21st of this month. I signed Proclamation number 1081, placing the entire Philippines under martial law. I repeat, this is not a military takeover of civilian government function. The government of the Republic of the Philippines, which was established by our people in 1956, continues. Curfew is established from 12 o'clock midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning. If you offend the new society, you shall be punished like the rest of the offenders. I repeat, this government is the same government that you, the people, established in 1946 under the Constitution of the Philippines. There is no doubt in everybody's mind that a state of rebellion exists in the Philippines. To those guilty of treason, insurrection, rebellion, it may pose a grave danger, but to the ordinary citizens, to almost all of you, its primary concern is merely to be left alone to pursue your lawful activities. This is the guarantee of that freedom that you seek. All that I do is for the Republic and for you.
On September 23, 1972, Marcos placed the Philippines under martial law. This period of imposed military authority and suspension of civil rights plagued the country for 14 years. As Marcos' two presidential terms were coming to a close, he had disguised his martial law as a ploy to extend his reign over the country for as long as he could. Under martial law, the Filipino people had endured a great deal of injustice and oppression. To name a few, about 70,000 people were imprisoned, 34,000 people were tortured, and roughly 3,240 were killed. In addition to this, the dictator made it a point to deny the people their freedom of speech. Through this, he made it a goal to shut down privately owned media companies. Through ensuring that the entirety of power was his alone and silencing the media, Marcos was able to use his time to plunder millions of dollars and ensure that those who were considered threats were rounded up and arrested no matter who they were, to name a few. The Filipino people endured great injustice during that 14-year period in time. The events that transpired during the martial law and the Marcos regime in general will always be remembered as one of the darkest periods in Philippine history.
Martial law also marked the period when the line between leftist activists and communists began to blur in the eyes of government. All and any opposition openly became targets of Marcos' ire. Erstwhile Marcos led his military campaign against them, threats of the armed left became one of his constant justification for the law. On the legal front, here's former Kabataan Makabayan and Nationalist Alliance for Justice, Freedom and Democracy member Eugenio Fabregas on his experience during the time.
Human rights violations were ongoing even before martial law was declared. The student protest rallies were met with violence, and there were many casualties. At the time, also abduction of student leaders led to the increase of the members of the New People's Army. For fear of their safety, a lot were joining the New People's Army. When martial law was declared, there was immediately a rush in arrests, mass arrests, not only of student leaders, but also of politicians who were sympathetic to the call for change. There was still violence committed on the populace and on the nationalist leaders, even after Marcos was deposed. Rallies were still met with violent reactions from the military. Student leaders, like a very close friend of mine, Andro, was executed, assassinated, by members of the military, later identified to be part of the RAM movement. Some say it was flourishing business was flourishing during martial law because the people had no right to redress. Labor unions were banned and were considered illegal. Nobody could protest the very low wages. Farmers could not protest the high prices of farm inputs, and the military could run roughshod over anybody. However, towards the latter part of martial law, the middle and towards the latter part, a lot of businesses were being taken over by Marcos and Imelda's, we call this relatives, they're sycophants, and so many old businessmen were losing their business to the Marcos clique. I don't think we are demonizing a saint right now. I believe that the Marcos government was a demon in itself for all human rights violations. There is a revisionist point of view now that Marcos was the greatest Philippine president, that he brought us to progress. I can say that it is true he had grandiose plans for the Philippines, to be a nation, to be great again, etc. But the implementation of the plan was not brought to fruition. Oh, it changed my life. Completely. There was a time when I gave my all to the movement for change, which was to depose Marcos and democratize the riches of our country. This has been with me all my life. I see a similarity or a parallelism in the steps that Marcos took before martial law and the steps that the government is doing now. I was active during the first quarter storm, 1970 until 1972. And then from 1972 until 1983, I was, what do you call it? Sleeping or building a family. 1983 came, Ninoy Aquino was assassinated, I reactivated until 1986 when Marcos was next. And the movement eventually broke up into several factions. For me, that was the biggest deterrent to progress in this country.
The memory of time gone by is the only link we have now with our history and our people. But knowledge about the past that we continuously use until now keeps the legacy of the martyrs and the song of the mass resound.